It was the Huey Nelson, the ex-original Northwest Mounted Policeman Ranger at New Denver, who invented the biggest thing was he suggested this system of honorary fire wardens. Willing, able citizen in each locality was given the authority to take action on fires. And it was something that really worked. We had an honorary forest officer in every little settlement, village, and what have you. The conscientious men on the job, and it really filled the bill. But around 1920, the early 20s, and before that, the logging was nearly all on privately owned timber. In fact, after they prohibited the staking of any more timber licenses, there was no method whereby they could dispose of crown timber to the logger. It was just frozen. The result was that some inaccessible corner, the logger couldn't get legal rights to it, but while he was in there, he'd log it and take it out anyhow. And then the forest would charge him for trespass. Then they started the system of selling timber by timber sales. But I remember the first winter, 1920-21, there wasn't one timber sale application in the whole of the Nelson Forest District. Now it's practically all sold by the government. In the interior, the private timber all been logged out long ago. That there wasn't the work then in connection with timber that there is now. We had to inspect wherever they were logging, but it was all on private land, not so many jobs. Well, it was a lot of that was wild, speculative staking, you see, hoping to sell. And they were gradually dropped. Quit taking them. But there were big blocks of all railway land grants. Nearly the whole of the main Lardeau Valley and a lot of the Duncan were all railway land grants. I forget the size of them now. I think, 3 miles per 12 and stuff like that. In fact, all the country adjacent to Creslow was under one of those things. And after most of the timber in the country was staked, then the government abolished staking, but there was, it was, in the end, the last big flurry of staking, it was speculators. And of course, they got tired of paying the annual fees and dropped them, reverted back to the government. But a lot of them log now. See, at that time, they could only move timber either by sleigh haul in the winter or river drive. So anything that wasn't within sleigh haul distance of water transportation was inaccessible. Commercially, it couldn't be logged. A small scale in the summer. The logging camps used to open about the end of October. And very different to what it is now, of course. The logging, you might say, was confined to snow conditions. I remember one winter in the cusp, an outfit cut 1 million feet of logs, which was a big sum those days, in the 20s. They weren't able to haul a single log out to the lake that winter. There wasn't enough snow. In fact, this country was getting pretty well cut out. They figured the logging only had a very limited future. And then they started building trucks rugged enough to handle logs, and there was more timber than there had been before. There was railroad logging in East Kootenai around Elko and in that area there, and the CPR logging railway at Yak. Otherwise, apart from water, it was all manual and horse muscle. Man and horsepower was the only thing. And so they had to be physically able men to be any good. That was the criterion in judging men, how strong they were. On that forest district at Southern Interior, when they started in 1925, they split up some of the ranger districts. Originally in 1920, the Nelson Ranger District took in the Arrow Lake up to Edgewood, and then Nelson, the whole of Kootenai Lake to Trout Lake and to the head of the Duncan. One ranger, 2 patrolmen. And they split Kootenai Lake off from it, split it in 2. No, it wasn't. In 1925, in the reorganization of Southern Interior, they split Kootenai Lake off the Nelson Ranger District. Kootenai Lake, Lardeau, and Duncan were the headquarters in Caslow, and I was moved in there. That was the first year, 1925, first year of the Caslow Ranger District. Then in recent years it was split again. Lardeau was made a separate ranger district, and the south end of Kootenai Lake was split off, tucked onto Creston. In 1925, there was very little logging, active logging around Caslow. The Howland and Waltz company had been logging the old K&S land grant, had gone broke. There was logging in the Lardo, but it was mostly poles and fence posts at that time. It was a shock when I moved into Caslow, the headquarters there. I wanted to know where the equipment was. Oh, we haven't got any. We depend on the Howland and Waltz Company's tools. It's a fact. Lardo, they did have equipment, but it was those days when you needed mountain goats for firefighters. The only roads out of Caslow were down to Ainsworth, up the South Fork, and the Shutty Bench. Caslow was isolated as regards roads, depended on water transportation. They were building the Queens Bay Ainsworth Road in 1925. I think it was opened, I think in 26 it was opened, finished. It was an outlet. Okay. For that time they had wires working in there, and I was in Lardo and got a telegram, an old cousin of mine that tried to contact me overseas all through the war, never did. It landed in Nelson, wanted to see me, so I had to quit and come back. He was a Boer War vet. And then I started working in Widdowson's assay office. Well, the gas and fumes and indoors didn't suit. And the forestry had lost a man and wanted somebody on for the rest of the season, and I took that on. 1919. Then the next year I took the exams and passed, and although the first jobs were only 5 or 6 months appointments, summer jobs, they kept me on through the winter. Then I took the Rangers games and got on the permanent staff. And stayed with them. But it was the experience packing with Andy Daney that gave me a little bit of an edge with them. Because there were no cars or trucks then, and it was pack horses and so on, and knowledge of packing was an asset. The Nelson district, you see, was so much smaller then. It took in the boundary country, Arrow, Slocan, and Kootenai Lakes, from the border up to the railway belt. The 5 ranger districts: Weimar, Nelson, Nakusp, Arrowhead, New Denver. The New Denver Ranger was Huey Nelson, was an original Northwest Mounted Police. He was in those battles in the real rebellion. Then in 1925, the forestry reorganized and called it the Southern Interior District. That took in the Okanagan and east to Alberta. Later, the Okanagan was cut off and put on the Kamloops. Three of us were cruising the Evans Creek, and that was the camp we had under a rock there. The old Huey Nelson at Northwest, the Ranger New Denver, ex-Northwest Mounted Police, he was one of the crew. The fellow and myself and Sawyer Hope. That is the year 32, there was no forestry. They abolished the Forest Protection Fund. If somebody wanted to report a fire, we couldn't even pay for the long distance call. We expected, of course, normally there'd be fires and the public would put up enough uproar that there'd be something done. It turned out to be a near fireless year. Intermittent rain all summer. Couldn't burn. The only way we could fight a fire if people would volunteer to work on it for free. Themselves and whoever to help us. Yeah, the next year, very limited. 25 cents an hour. And all kinds of restrictions on it. You're limited to $25 on a fire in young growth, maximum of $50 on a timber, in merchantable timber. But you had to get approval from headquarters before you could do that. That was the year I got in trouble at Caslow. There were a lot of little lightning strikes. Definitely lightning, and no argument about it at all. And a lot of young bucks around there were very good. So I took to telling them, you think you can get that fire out for $25? If you think you can, there's $25 in it. And that's the maximum. If it takes you more time than that, you don't get any more money. See, they just grab it and go and get them. Well, later on in the summer, I was called on the carpet down here that they were talking to, around the public that the forestry were contracting the firefighting, and they tracked it up to me at Castle. I was on the carpet. But it worked. There was no sense fooling the guys. $25 were all we're allowed to spend on it fire, and if we couldn't stop it but in that $25 worth of time, there was no use starting. Sometimes they maybe get it out for $10 worth of time. Sometimes it might be $50. But we got our fires out. I was on the carpet. Oh, I think the Caslow district and the Slocan district had the best firefighters I know of. And they had to be able men, too, scrambling around those mountainsides. So we used to get into trouble. Maybe have a big fire in the Lardo, you see, and not enough local help, and get men shipped in. We finally took to inspected them when they got off the boat. If they didn't have good boots, right back on the boat. Because if they just had Oxfords and that sort of thing, couldn't hold their footing, It meant that other men had to double up for him. So we notified headquarters, you see, not to ship any men unless they had proper boots. They did. We sent them back. That was a character. He belonged to a Caslow prospector named Shorty Edwards. And as I recollect, he was prospecting across the lake. And I thought something had gone wrong with him. And some boys went over to check on his camp. And it seemed he'd shot himself accidentally, but hadn't killed him. He was still alive. And they put it down to the warmth of this dog that was keeping him alive. But they couldn't touch him. The dog wouldn't let them. They had to come back to Caslow, get somebody the dog knew before they could help him. They got him back to hospital and he died. And I fell heir to the dog.
He was a cranky old thing, too.
Yeah, that's him. Oh, he was a smart one-man dog. But I went on fires, I found I had to leave him home. Because if I dropped my pack in camp, you see, and then it turned out I wanted something from it, and then I run her down, the dog wouldn't allow him to touch it, kill him. But I expected when they brought him to me, you see, one evening, that the next morning he'd beat it for his old home. Like, his home was that way and I was going this way. He never once went to his old home. He just seemed to know that Shorty was gone and that was that. He perched himself on the table. That's in the forestry office in Caslow. Yeah, the old Amabilis. I think it was, she was built about 1928 or 29. The first time we'd had a proper boat on the main lake that could go out in any weather. You see, and she was our link between Caslow and Lardeau and the other side of the lake anywhere. She's down on the beach here now by KFB. Still in existence. And the riverboat on the Duncan, 32-footer, she was a good boat. That's her out of water. That's the old King George Hotel at Caslow. Burned down. That's about where the Moye is now. The Ellesmere mine at Ellesmere Claims. An incident there was some people had optioned the claims, and I went out, took the pack train in with the supplies. There was a piece of sloping rock along the trail, and a dapple grey mule we had, he happened to be loaded with the mixed groceries, including eggs, and a bag of mustard and pepper and stuff like that. His feet went out from under him and he rolled. They had mustard, eggs and stuff all over the place. Then he didn't do any packing on the Duncan. The only contact we had with the Duncan was the old gold mine at the head of, forget the name now, up on the west fork of the Duncan, and up the north fork of the Lardeau, then over the summit and along. And there was a water grade trail blasted out of the limestone cliffs. In fact, when it was surveyed, they'd worked from the mine towards the summit and were stymied. And then they worked from the summit over, and they couldn't see around. Andy Daney was the only man that was able and willing to go out there and put a picket in connecting the two. Oh, it was like that. That was a new cabin at the old gold mine, is the name of it. New cabin they built up near the mine. First cabin would be down the bottom. Pete Culkeen, he was a placer miner at 10 Mile. He's a real old-timer. He told me he knew Andy Daney down in the San Juan country in Colorado, where Daney originated it. And that was why Daney was such a success there in Ferguson. The story was he came in there in the spring with nothing, and in the fall he owned a pack train and whole outfit. I've read a book that had a description of the San Juan country, and it was a duplicate of that Ferguson country. Stood on edge in heavy snow. He was familiar with it, you see, whereas most of the men coming in there weren't. That's the old marble quarry at Marblehead. Ernie Morrell, the boss. There was a big fire in 31, I guess it was. Yeah, in 31 up in the Kokanee Park, the head of the South Fork from Caslow. I was standing in the middle of it when I took those pictures, and quite safe. The first plane the force had in spotter plane, a little moth. We thought that was something wonderful. That's Caslow from a mile in the air. That was really something at that time. That was where I spent the first winter in BC, 1911. That's the Molly Gibson mine buildings in summer. And there in November, just one corner of the building showing, and at Christmas only the stopepipes. That, a little X about where the mine is. The whole thing was snowslide. These buildings were all cabled back to the rock. The snowslides went over. The original camp was further up the hill and got wiped out with a snowslide. But two of them survived. Carried all the way down to the bottom here and lived. One of them afterwards, knew him, he was a bartender at the old Grand Central. Can't think of his name now. That was a good initiation for a green English kid on the snow. Probably saved my life afterwards. Could have saw the whole thing, you see. What made slides run and when they run and all about it. The Air Lakes did a lot of logging by chute down to the water. That was my saddle horse the year I was in the Slocan. He was a wise old animal. One trip up Coe Creek off the Little Slocan, and I'd moved up as far as I could with the horse and made camp for the night. And then, after I picked up my camp, I waded across the creek to take a look around, and here was a little fire just starting about a mile up the mountain over my head. Because I started for outside. I got about 20 miles to go. And it was just near dusk when I started. And I stopped at the patrol cabin at Ridley Creek. They told the patrolman to get out at daylight and get up the fire and be down to meet the crew coming in. And I was heading out for Passmore, and I was urging him too much to make time. And he fell, with me under him. I told him to stay quiet, and he did while I got clear. If he'd struggled, he'd had been a mess. It was rocky ground and everything. He was a smart pony.